I started this sermon series with a simple idea, that stories are maps. The stories that we tell, the stories that are told about us, tell us who we are and what the world is. They tell us who we could be and what the world could be. They tell us how to get from what is to what could be. And so those stories are important because if we tell the wrong story, we'll go the wrong direction. From the world as it is to the world as we do not want it to be. But if we tell the right story, if we tell the right stories about ourselves, if we tell the right stories about the world, if we tell the right stories about each other, we can find a way to the world that we long for, that we are desperate for. And part of how we do that is by getting the right things into our attention collections, by paying attention to where there's hope and joy and love and all of those wonderful things. And part of how we do that is by choosing good ancestors, by finding those stories that we want to continue and continuing them. And now we are at the end. We're at the end of the sermon series. And we are also, given our readings today, if you chart a course through Scripture from the beginning to the end, we are at the end of Scripture. The end of the story, the world as God intends it to be. A while ago, I was listening to a podcast. I think it was The Bible for Normal People. And they had as their guest John Dominic Crossan. John Dominic Crossan is a Bible scholar. He's a former priest. He's got all of these credentials. He has done amazing work. He is also a really nice guy. I had the pleasure of meeting him once after he gave a talk in he gave the talk in a church, but I met him in someone's kitchen. And he's just this really nice Irish guy. On the podcast, and I'm not going to try to do the accent, he talked about how in the Bible, in our scriptures, things are labeled like there are 4 Gospels: Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. But he said that's a misunderstanding of what's going on. There is one gospel, one kind of good news, and that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We get the gospel according to Matthew, and according to Mark, and according to Luke, and according to John, according to Paul, according to Peter, according to another John, according to this person and that person and another person. And if we're honest, there are a lot of ways to tell that good news. So, I'm going to give you very quickly a rundown that you've heard before, the gospel, the good news, according to Pastor Chris, at the moment. The God who is love created the world and everything that is in it, and created the world in love and by love, and loved it, and gave it as a gift to itself. And we broke it. We created a distance between the world as God intends it to be and the world as it is. and we put the world under the power of death. And when I say death, I don't just mean the fact that we're all going to die. Even though we are, not hopefully anytime soon, I mean all of those things that make life less. All of those things that bring fear and worry and concern and distress and sadness into our lives. And seeing that, God came into the world. God sent prophets and preachers and healers and teachers, and then God came into the world as one of us, as Jesus, the one in whom divinity and humanity, holiness and brokenness meet. And in Jesus, God taught us and told us and showed us how to live and how to love and how to be human. So we nailed him to a cross and hung him there until he died and laid him in a tomb. And for a moment, the powers of death had won. Everything was dead. We might not have known it yet, we might not have noticed it yet, but everything was dead. And then the God who is love, the one in whom divinity and humanity, holiness and brokenness meet, got up and stepped out from under the power of death into the garden. Now the one in whom divinity and humanity, holiness and wholeness meet. And he was not the only one, he was just the first one. That is for everyone. When we read the book of Revelation, we often think about the end of the world, the destruction of everything, wiping the slate clean and then breaking the slate, and then getting a new one and creating a whole new world. And maybe the best people get to go there from the old world. Maybe God will just make new people. We think that it's about getting rid of the old and bringing in the new, but I don't think that's there in the book. If you read it carefully, I'm not sure you ever see what is get destroyed. The things that are destroying what is get destroyed, and death and all its powers are no more. And there is a new heaven and a new earth. But I wonder if that is not so much a story about destruction and recreation as it is a story about resurrection. A story about removing the power of death from the world and bringing it back to what it could be. That is a story worth telling. There is a difference between a life that is lived waiting for the destruction of everything and a life that is lived in the hope of the resurrection of everything. There is a difference between the life that is lived thinking, when everything goes south and is no more, I might get out of it, and a life that is lived with the expectation that I myself will be made new, and everything around me will be made new, and we will all be brought to life together in a place where the God who is love is our light, our sun and our moon and our temple, and our lives are lived in worship of him. And when I say worship, I do not mean church services, even though maybe there will still be those. And I do not mean playing little harps and singing little hymns, although maybe there will be some of that. And I do not mean shouting praise, although maybe there will be some of that. I mean living lives that are defined by love, that are filled with love, that pour out love, that honor the God who is love. I mean lives that are human lives, where holiness and wholeness meet. And if that is where we are headed, if where we are going is that world, if the road that we are on is that road, then we are by definition on a revolutionary road. We are by definition on a road that aims to change everything, because we are participating in the resurrection of the world. And I want to be clear, because I do not mean any of that in a kind of, there's a word I'm not supposed to say in church, so let's just say garbage, Christian nationalist way. I don't mean in the kind of way where a bunch of people who are just like us seek political power in order to force everyone to live just like us. I mean, we aim to live lives that are full of joy. Because joy by itself is a revolutionary act in a world that is under the power of death. I mean lives that are defined by hope. Because hope itself is a revolutionary act in a world that is under the power of death. I mean lives that are defined by love, because love itself is a revolutionary act in a world that is under the power of death. I mean lives that are defined by hospitality and generosity. Lives that are defined by being humans in community with each other and with all of each other. With men and with women and with non-binary people, with old and with young and with middle-aged, with people of every creed and every color, every identity and orientation, everything. Because living in that kind of community, especially when that kind of community is defined by love, is a deeply revolutionary act. It is the kind of thing that might change a church, a town, a state, a country, a world. And nobody will be able to fight against it. Because it won't be about finding the army that is leading it. It won't be about defeating the politicians who are trying to bring it about. It won't be about getting those who have the powers of the world to change, although we hope. And it matters how we vote, and it matters how we are activists, and it matters that we show up to meetings and all that kind of stuff. But like a mustard seed planted in a garden, or a little bit of yeast in a whole lot of dough, it'll just get everywhere. And once it's everywhere, it cannot be rooted out. And before we know it, we will be standing in a garden, looking around at a resurrected world, with God as our sun and our moon and our temple, and we ourselves will be human and alive again.